Early morning in Millbrook, Ohio. Jake Matthews was elbow-deep in engine grease when a scream shattered the silence. He bolted, sprinted across the street, found her crumpled on the park trail, ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. The 34-year-old mechanic didn't hesitate, scooped her up, carried her to his family garage like she weighed nothing. As he cleaned her wound with gentle precision, details struck him. Designer purse worth more than his monthly rent, manicured nails that had never seen manual labor, a voice too polished, too practiced for small-town Ohio. "Thank you," Emma whispered, studying his simple workspace with curious eyes. She seemed grateful, yet somehow calculating. Jake Matthews thought he was just helping an injured stranger. But what would he do when he discovered that this stranger had no intention of leaving his quiet little town? 2 days later, Jake spotted the same woman limping past his garage. Emma Sterling had rented the small cottage at the end of Maple Street and somehow acquired a beat-up Honda from Miller's Used Cars. When Jake asked why she hadn't returned home, Emma's answer came too quickly. "I need time to think about my life," she said, avoiding his eyes. The explanation felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. Jake lived in the same house where he'd brought Sarah as a newlywed, where they'd painted Lily's nursery yellow because they wanted to be surprised. 2 years had passed since cancer took Sarah, but her presence lingered in every corner. The handmade leather bracelet she'd crafted for their wedding day still circled his wrist. "So you'll always remember simple love?" she'd whispered as she tied it on. Simple love. That's what Sarah had given him, and what he'd lost forever. Emma introduced herself as a freelance consultant taking an extended sabbatical. Her story had holes big enough to drive a truck through, but Jake didn't pry. Small towns attracted people running from something. The way Emma winced when her phone buzzed, how she'd turn it face down during conversations, the careful way she counted bills at Murphy's Diner suggested she was hiding more than just a bad breakup. 8-year-old Lily took to Emma immediately. While Jake remained cautious, his daughter saw only a woman who knew how to make pancakes with berries arranged like flowers and could braid hair in patterns Lily had never seen. "She's fancy, Daddy," Lily announced after Emma's 3rd visit to the garage. "But not scary fancy, nice fancy." Jake wondered what his daughter meant by that distinction. Emma's visits became routine. She'd stop by with coffee from the diner, claiming her rental car was making strange noises. Jake soon realized she knew more about engines than most of his regular customers. Her questions were too specific, her understanding of torque specs too precise for someone who supposedly drove only to the grocery store. But he played along, enjoying the company more than he cared to admit. The first month passed like this. Emma would appear each morning around 9, after Jake had dropped Lily at school. She'd watch him work, occasionally handing him tools with an efficiency that suggested familiarity with automotive repair. Their conversations stayed surface level, but Jake began to notice details. How Emma's eyes tracked his movements with professional interest. How she unconsciously straightened her shoulders when discussing business concepts. How her manicured facade was slowly giving way to calloused fingertips from helping with repairs. "You don't talk like someone from around here," Jake observed one morning as Emma helped him replace brake pads on Mrs. Chen's Buick. Emma's hands stilled on the wrench. "Where do you think I'm from?" she asked carefully. Jake shrugged. "Somewhere important? Somewhere people wear suits to work and drink coffee that costs more than my lunch." Emma's laugh sounded forced. "That's oddly specific." But she didn't deny it. The second month brought deeper conversations. Emma asked about Sarah with genuine curiosity, not the awkward sympathy most people offered. What was she like? Became a question Jake actually wanted to answer. He found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone since the funeral. How Sarah had insisted on learning to change her own oil. How she'd painted a mural of wildflowers on Lily's bedroom wall that still made their daughter smile. how she'd made him promise to find happiness again, even though he'd insisted it was impossible. Emma listened with an intensity that made Jake uncomfortable. Not because she seemed uninterested, but because she hung on every word like she was studying for a test. "She sounds wonderful," Emma said, after Jake described Sarah's last good day, when she'd insisted on teaching Lily to bake chocolate chip cookies. "She was everything," Jake replied, his voice catching slightly. Emma nodded, something unreadable flickering across her features. "Everyone deserves that kind of love," she murmured. The third month brought subtle changes. Emma's designer clothes gave way to jeans and simple t-shirts. Her perfect manicure disappeared, replaced by hands that showed honest work. She helped Jake install new shelving in the garage and didn't flinch when motor oil stained her shirt. Lily began asking when Miss Emma would visit, timing her afternoon snacks around Emma's usual departure time. Jake caught himself looking forward to their morning conversations. Emma had a way of listening that made him feel heard, not just tolerated. She asked follow-up questions about his work, remembered details about his regular customers, and somehow made him laugh for the first time in months. But questions nagged at him. Why did Emma never mention family or friends? Why did she pay for everything in cash? Why did her eyes go distant whenever her phone rang? One afternoon in late April, Jake's curiosity overcame his manners. Emma had left her phone face up on his workbench while helping him diagnose a transmission problem. When it buzzed with a text preview, Jake couldn't help but glance over. The sender was listed as Victoria Sterling, and the message began with, "The board is getting impatient." Jake looked away immediately, but the damage was done. Sterling. That wasn't the last name on Emma's rental agreement. That evening, Jake sat on his front porch while Lily did homework inside. The pieces of Emma's puzzle rattled around his mind, refusing to form a clear picture. The expensive clothes hidden under thrift store finds, the business knowledge disguised as casual conversation, the phone calls she took in private, speaking with an authority that didn't match her claimed profession. The way she studied his garage like she was memorizing blueprints. He was still thinking about Emma Sterling when Lily called him inside for dinner. As they ate leftover casserole at the kitchen table where Sarah used to sit, Jake realized something had shifted. For the first time since Sarah's death, he wasn't eating alone with his daughter. There was an empty chair at their table, but it no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. The feeling scared him more than he wanted to admit. Sarah had been his everything, his first love, and what he'd assumed would be his only love. The thought of caring for someone else felt like betrayal, even though Sarah had made him promise to find happiness again. "You have so much love to give, Jake," she'd whispered during one of their last conversations. "Don't waste it on grief." But grief felt safer than hope. As spring turned toward summer, Jake found himself torn between growing feelings for Emma and loyalty to Sarah's memory. He began taking longer routes past Emma's cottage, hoping to catch glimpses of her daily routine. He learned she was an early riser who did yoga in her backyard and tended a small garden with surprising skill. She kept her curtains drawn most of the day and rarely had visitors, except for a weekly delivery from an upscale grocery service that seemed incongruous with her claimed budget constraints. The contradiction between Emma's stated circumstances and her actual lifestyle became harder to ignore. She claimed to be conserving money during her sabbatical, yet she'd quietly paid for Lily's field trip to the Science Museum when Jake mentioned the cost was stretching their budget. She said she was unfamiliar with small-town life, yet she navigated local politics with the savvy of someone accustomed to complex negotiations. Jake's suspicions crystallized during the annual Millbrook community picnic in mid-May. Emma had volunteered to help organize the event, and Jake watched her coordinate vendors, negotiate contracts, and manage logistics with corporate efficiency. She spoke to the mayor like an equal, offered solutions to budget shortfalls with casual expertise, and somehow convinced 3 local businesses to sponsor activities they'd never supported before. "She's good at this," commented Bill Murphy, who owned the diner where Emma ate breakfast most mornings. "Real good. Makes me wonder what kind of consulting she really does." Jake nodded, watching Emma field questions from the volunteer committee with the patience of someone accustomed to managing much larger operations. Whatever Emma was running from, it involved serious responsibility and significant resources. That night, Jake made a decision that would change everything. After putting Lily to bed, he opened his laptop and typed Emma Sterling into the search engine. What he found made his blood run cold. The first result was a Forbes article titled, "Sterling Dynamics CEO Takes Indefinite Leave Following Personal Crisis." The accompanying photo showed Emma in a power suit, standing behind a podium at what appeared to be a shareholder meeting. Her hair was shorter, her smile more practiced, but it was unmistakably the same woman who'd been helping him organize his tool collection for the past 3 months. Jake scrolled through article after article, each one revealing another layer of deception. Emma Sterling wasn't a freelance consultant taking a sabbatical. She was the chief executive officer of Sterling Dynamics, a technology conglomerate worth over $2 billion. The articles painted a picture of a woman who'd built an empire, lost her husband in a tragic accident, and subsequently disappeared from public life without explanation. The timeline matched perfectly. David Sterling had died in a car crash 6 months ago, shortly after which Emma had vanished from corporate events and board meetings. Her company's stock price had fluctuated wildly in her absence, and industry analysts speculated about everything from a hostile takeover to a complete mental breakdown. Jake stared at his laptop screen until his eyes burned. The woman he'd been falling for didn't exist. Emma, the freelance consultant, was a fiction, a character played by someone whose daily decisions affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. The simple life she claimed to want was just another lie in a web of deception that stretched back months. He thought about every conversation they'd shared, every moment of apparent vulnerability, every laugh they'd exchanged over coffee and motor oil. Had any of it been real? Was he just an amusing diversion for a billionaire slumming it in small-town Ohio? The questions multiplied until Jake felt physically sick. The next morning, Jake could barely look at Emma when she arrived at the garage with her usual coffee and easy smile. She seemed to sense his changed mood, but attributed it to typical masculine emotional complexity. "Rough night?" she asked, handing him a cup from Murphy's diner. Jake accepted it without meeting her eyes. "Something like that," he muttered, turning back to the engine he'd been pretending to examine. Emma spent the morning trying to break through Jake's sudden coldness, but he deflected every attempt at conversation. Finally, she set down her tools and faced him directly. "What's wrong? Did I do something?" The genuine concern in her voice almost broke his resolve. Almost. "Nothing's wrong," Jake lied. "Just busy today." Emma studied his face with the intensity of someone used to reading people's true motivations. "You're a terrible liar, Jake Matthews." The irony of her statement hit Jake like a physical blow. Emma Sterling, billionaire CEO, was calling him a terrible liar. He let out a bark of bitter laughter that made Emma step back. "That's rich, coming from you," he said, finally meeting her eyes. Something in his expression must have warned her, because Emma's face went very still. "What do you mean by that?" she asked carefully. Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the Forbes article, watching her face crumble as she recognized the photo. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emma sank onto the garage's single folding chair, looking smaller than Jake had ever seen her. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Since last night," Jake replied. 3 months, Emma. 3 goddamn months of lies. Emma's explanation came in a rush of words that sounded rehearsed yet desperate. She talked about David's death, the crushing pressure of running a corporation while grieving, the way her life had become a performance she couldn't sustain. She'd chosen Millbrook randomly, she claimed, looking for a place where she could disappear and remember who she used to be before success and tragedy redefined her existence. "I never meant for it to go this far," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I'd stay a few weeks, maybe a month. But then I met you and Lily, and for the first time in years I felt like myself again. Not Emma Sterling, CEO. Just Emma. Just a woman who could help fix cars and make pancakes and listen to stories about the love of your life." Jake wanted to believe her. The pain in her voice sounded genuine, and her tears appeared real. But trust, once broken, proved impossible to repair with explanations. "Do you have any idea what this feels like?" he asked, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. "I told you about Sarah, about losing the only woman I ever loved. I shared things with you that I haven't told anyone. And the whole time, you were lying about who you are." Emma reached for his hand, but Jake pulled away. "I know how it looks," she said desperately. "But everything I felt, everything we shared that was real, the woman you knew exists. She's just not the whole story." Jake shook his head. "No, Emma. The woman I knew was a character you played. A role you performed because real life got too hard, and I was stupid enough to fall for it." The admission hung between them like a live wire. Jake hadn't meant to confess his feelings, especially not like this. But the words were out now, and there was no taking them back. Emma's face showed a mixture of hope and despair that might have moved him 6 hours earlier. Now it just looked like another performance. "Jake, please," Emma whispered. "Give me a chance to explain everything. Let me show you that what we have is real, even if the circumstances weren't honest." Jake turned away, focusing on the engine that suddenly seemed like the most important thing in the world. "What we have? We don't have anything, Emma. You made sure of that when you decided to base our entire relationship on a lie." Emma sat in silence for several minutes, and Jake almost hoped she might find words that could bridge the chasm between them. Instead, she stood quietly and walked toward the garage door. "For what it's worth," she said without turning around, "falling for you wasn't part of the plan. That was the most honest thing I've done in years." Then she was gone, leaving Jake alone with his tools and his shattered trust. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of routine and regret. Jake threw himself into work, fixing every car in Millbrook and traveling to nearby towns when he ran out of local projects. Lily asked about Emma every day until Jake snapped at her to stop mentioning the woman who'd abandoned them. His daughter's hurt expression haunted him for hours afterward. Emma's cottage remained occupied, but Jake never saw her leave or return. Groceries appeared on her doorstep, and her lights came on each evening, but she'd become a ghost haunting the edges of his consciousness. Part of him hoped she'd pack up and return to her billion-dollar life, making it easier to forget she'd ever existed. Another part of him waited for her to show up at the garage with an explanation that could somehow make everything right. Neither scenario played out the way Jake imagined. Instead, on a humid Thursday morning in early June, a convoy of black SUVs rolled down Millbrook's main street like an invasion force. Jake watched from his garage as the vehicles parked outside Emma's cottage, disgorging men in expensive suits who moved with corporate efficiency. The lead figure was a woman in her 60s, silver-haired and sharp-featured, who surveyed Millbrook like a general assessing a battlefield. Even from a distance, Jake could see the family resemblance to Emma in the set of her shoulders and the tilt of her chin. This had to be Victoria Sterling, the mother-in-law whose text message had started Jake's investigation. Within an hour, word spread through Millbrook's efficient gossip network. The mysterious woman in the cottage at the end of Maple Street was actually a billionaire CEO, and her corporate family had come to drag her back to reality. Jake fielded questions from neighbors and customers all morning, deflecting curiosity with increasingly curt responses. The confrontation Jake had been dreading finally arrived just after lunch. Victoria Sterling walked into his garage like she owned it, her heels clicking against the concrete floor with military precision. She was smaller than Jake had expected, but radiated an authority that made the space feel cramped, despite its generous dimensions. "Mr. Matthews," she said, without preamble, "I'm Victoria Sterling. I believe you've been acquainted with my daughter-in-law." Jake wiped his hands on a rag, buying time to compose himself. "If you mean Emma, then yes. We're acquainted." Victoria's smile held no warmth. "Acquainted. That's a diplomatic way to put it." Victoria's next words hit Jake like a physical assault. She knew about every coffee shared, every conversation exchanged, every moment of growing intimacy between Jake and Emma. The corporation employed private investigators, she explained, who'd been monitoring Emma's activities since her disappearance. Jake's garage, his home, his relationship with his daughter had all been under surveillance for months. "Emma is experiencing what psychologists call a dissociative episode," Victoria continued, her voice clinical and detached. "She's created an elaborate fantasy life to avoid dealing with her responsibilities and her grief. You and your daughter have become props in her healing narrative. I'm sure it feels real to you, but I assure you it's temporary." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The casual way Victoria dismissed his feeling, reduced his life to a therapeutic exercise, made him want to throw her out of his garage physically. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said through gritted teeth. "Whatever Emma was running from, what we built together was real." Victoria's laugh was sharp and condescending. "Mr. Matthews, Emma owns a penthouse in Manhattan that costs more per month than you make in a year. She has 15,000 employees depending on her decisions and board meetings that determine the fate of companies across 3 continents. Do you honestly believe she'll choose your garage over all of that?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that Emma's feelings for him and Lily could outweigh a billion-dollar empire. But doubt crept in, whispering reminders of how easily Emma had maintained her deception, how naturally she'd slipped into corporate efficiency during the community picnic, how comfortable she'd seemed with authority and influence. Victoria pressed her advantage. "I've taken the liberty of researching your financial situation, Mr. Matthews. You owe $45,000 in medical bills from your late wife's treatment. Your garage is profitable but not enough to handle unexpected expenses. Your daughter will need college funding in 10 years. I can solve all of these problems with a single wire transfer." The offer that followed made Jake's head spin. $2 million in exchange for his agreement to end all contact with Emma and relocate to another state. Victoria would pay off his debts, establish a trust fund for Lily's education, and set him up with a new garage anywhere he chose to start over. All he had to do was walk away and let Emma return to her real life without complications. Jake's first instinct was to throw the offer back in Victoria's face. The idea of selling his relationship with Emma, of treating their connection like a business transaction, made him physically ill. But as the practical implications sank in, his resolve wavered. $2 million represented security for Lily's future, freedom from the financial stress that kept him awake at night, and the ability to provide opportunities he'd never imagined possible. "You're asking me to disappear," Jake said slowly. "To take the money and pretend Emma never existed." Victoria nodded approvingly. I'm offering you a chance to give your daughter the life she deserves. Emma will recover from this episode and return to her responsibilities. Everyone wins. Jake thought about Lily, about the dreams he'd had to defer because of medical bills and limited income. He thought about Emma in her penthouse, surrounded by wealth and power that made his garage look like a child's playhouse. He thought about the investigation that had been watching his every move, reducing his life to data points in a corporate file. No, he said finally. No, I won't take your money. Victoria's eyebrows rose in surprise. No? She repeated. Mr. Matthews, I'm not sure you understand the scope of what I'm offering. Jake shook his head. I understand perfectly. You're offering to buy me off so Emma doesn't have to make a real choice. But if she's going to leave, it should be because she wants to, not because you paid me to disappear. Victoria's expression hardened. Very well, but understand that you're choosing poverty over prosperity, uncertainty over security. When Emma returns to Sterling Dynamics next week, don't expect her to maintain this fantasy relationship. Corporate life has a way of putting small-town diversions into perspective. After Victoria left, Jake sat alone in his garage for the first time in months. The space felt empty without Emma's presence, but also somehow cleaner. At least now all the deceptions were in the open. At least now he knew exactly where he stood in Emma's list of priorities. That evening brought unexpected visitors. A photographer with a telephoto lens had stationed himself across from Jake's house, and by nightfall, 3 news vans had parked along Maple Street. Word of Emma Sterling's small-town hideaway had leaked, and suddenly Millbrook found itself at the center of a media circus. The headlines that followed made Jake's stomach churn. Billionaire CEO's secret romance with small-town mechanic. Sterling Dynamics stock plummets as CEO plays house in Ohio. From boardroom to garage, Emma Sterling's midlife crisis goes viral. Each article portrayed their relationship as either a publicity stunt or a mental health crisis, stripping away any dignity or privacy they'd managed to maintain. Lily came home from school in tears, having been teased by classmates who'd seen her father's photo in online gossip columns. "Why are people saying mean things about you and Miss Emma?" she asked between sobs. Jake held his daughter close, struggling to find words that could explain adult complications to an 8-year-old heart. The media attention intensified when financial analysts began speculating about Sterling Dynamics' future. Emma's extended absence had created uncertainty about major deals and strategic initiatives. Stock prices fluctuated wildly based on rumors about her mental state and return timeline. Jake realized with growing horror that his personal life had become entangled with corporate politics affecting thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. On Friday morning, Emma finally appeared at his garage door. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect composure replaced by obvious stress and sleepless nights. The woman who'd hidden her identity so carefully for months now seemed stripped of all pretense. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I'm sorry about Victoria, about the investigators, about the media circus. I never wanted any of this to touch you and Lily." Jake continued working on the transmission he'd been rebuilding, not trusting himself to look at her directly. "But it did touch us, because you made choices that had consequences you didn't consider." Emma stepped into the garage, closing the door behind her. "You're right. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I hurt people I care about. But Jake, please believe me when I say that what happened between us was real. My feelings for you and Lily weren't part of some corporate strategy or therapeutic exercise." Jake finally looked up, studying Emma's face for signs of the performance skills that had fooled him for months. What he saw was exhaustion, regret, and something that looked like genuine love. It would have been easier if she'd seemed calculating or manipulative. Instead, she looked like a woman who'd made terrible choices and was finally facing the consequences. "It doesn't matter if your feelings were real," Jake said quietly. "What matters is that you have 15,000 employees counting on you to do your job. You have a company worth billions of dollars that's falling apart because you decided to play dress-up in small-town America. You have responsibilities that don't just disappear because you want a different life." Emma's face crumpled at his words. "You sound like Victoria," she whispered. "Like my worth is measured only by corporate success and stock prices." Jake shook his head. "No, Emma. I sound like someone who understands that actions have consequences. You can't just walk away from your life because it got difficult. People depend on you." The conversation that followed was the most honest they'd ever shared. Emma talked about the crushing pressure of running a corporation while grieving her husband's death. She described board meetings where she'd made decisions affecting thousands of jobs while struggling to get out of bed each morning. She explained how David's accident had shattered her confidence in her ability to balance personal happiness with professional success. "I came here to remember who I used to be," Emma said. "Before David died. Before I became responsible for everything and everyone. I wanted to find Emma again, not just the CEO who inherited a company." Jake listened with growing understanding, but unchanged resolve. "And did you find her?" he asked. Emma nodded slowly. "I found her with you, in this garage, making pancakes with Lily, learning to fix engines with my hands instead of managing spreadsheets with my mind. I found the woman David fell in love with, the one who got lost somewhere between quarterly reports and hostile takeover attempts." Jake felt his resistance weakening, but forced himself to stay focused. "Then you know what she would tell you to do. The Emma I knew wouldn't abandon 15,000 people because her personal life got complicated. She'd figure out how to honor her commitments while building the life she actually wants." The truth of his words hit Emma like a revelation. She'd been so focused on escaping her responsibilities that she'd forgotten why those responsibilities mattered. Sterling Dynamics wasn't just a corporation. It was thousands of families depending on steady paychecks, communities built around manufacturing facilities, and innovations that could improve millions of lives. "You're right," Emma said finally. "I have to go back. But Jake, that doesn't mean what we have isn't real or important. I want to find a way to honor both parts of my life." Jake wanted to believe her, but practical realities crowded out romantic possibilities. "How? You live in Manhattan? I live in Millbrook. You run board meetings. I fix transmissions. What kind of future could we possibly have?" Emma's answer surprised him. "The kind we build together, if you're willing to try. I can't walk away from Sterling Dynamics, but I don't have to let it consume my entire life. I can restructure my role, delegate more authority, spend time in places that matter to me." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Places where people I love are building the life I want to be part of." Before Jake could respond, the garage door opened and Lily burst in, home early from school. She launched herself at Emma with the unconscious affection of a child who hadn't learned to complicate love with adult anxieties. "Miss Emma, I missed you so much. Daddy said you might have to go away, but I told him you wouldn't leave without saying goodbye." Emma knelt to Lily's level, her composure finally cracking completely. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry I've been away. I had some grown-up problems to figure out, but I never stopped thinking about you and your daddy." Lily studied Emma's face with the serious expression she'd inherited from Sarah. "Are you going to stay now?" she asked. The question hung in the air, waiting for an answer that would determine all their futures. Emma looked at Jake over Lily's head, her eyes asking for permission to hope. "I don't know yet, baby," Emma said honestly. "That's something your daddy and I need to talk about." Lily nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can we make pancakes while you talk? Talking is easier with pancakes. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Jake and Emma sat on his front porch, watching fireflies dance across the yard where Sarah had once planted wildflowers. The media circus had finally moved on to other stories, leaving Millbrook to return to its usual quiet rhythms. In the distance, lights glowed in Emma's cottage, but neither of them mentioned whether she'd be sleeping there that night. "I leave for New York tomorrow," Emma said quietly. "Victoria's right about one thing. I can't keep avoiding my responsibilities. Sterling Dynamics is hemorrhaging money and confidence because I disappeared without a plan." Jake nodded, unsurprised, but still feeling the loss like a physical ache. "What happens after that?" Emma turned to face him fully. "I restructure everything. Promote key executives, delegate operational authority, create systems that don't require my constant presence. It'll take time, maybe 6 months to implement properly. But Jake, I want to come back. Not as Emma the consultant hiding from her life, but as Emma Sterling who's figured out how to live honestly." Jake wanted to believe her plans would work, but corporate restructuring sounded like the kind of promise people made before reality intervened. "And if the board objects? If your investors demand full-time attention? If running a billion-dollar company turns out to be incompatible with weekend visits to Ohio?" Emma's smile held sadness but also determination. "Then I'll face those problems as they come, instead of running away like I did before. But Jake, I need to know if there's something worth fighting for here. I need to know if you can forgive me for the lies and give us a chance to build something real." Jake thought about the past 4 months, about the woman who'd helped him remember how to laugh and made his daughter believe in magic again. He thought about the deception that had undermined everything they'd built, and the media attention that had exposed his private life to public scrutiny. He thought about Sarah's final words about finding happiness again, and Lily's simple faith that love could overcome adult complications. "I can't promise it'll be easy," Jake said finally. "Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and long-distance relationships are hard even when they don't involve billionaire CEOs and small-town mechanics. But Emma, what we had before the lies, that was worth fighting for. If you're willing to do the work, then yes, I'm willing to try." Emma's response was wordless but definitive. She reached for his hand, and this time Jake didn't pull away. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies and thinking about the complicated future they'd chosen to attempt together. 6 months later, on a crisp December morning, Jake was teaching Lily to change brake pads when a familiar car pulled up to the garage. Emma stepped out wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair shorter than he remembered, but her smile unchanged. She'd kept her promise, restructuring Sterling Dynamics into a more distributed organization that allowed her to work remotely 3 days a week. The cottage at the end of Maple Street had become her permanent second home, complete with a home office that connected her to corporate headquarters when needed. She'd also quietly established a scholarship fund for Millbrook students pursuing technical education, ensuring that her presence in the community created lasting benefits beyond her personal happiness. Jake and Emma's relationship had evolved slowly, built on video calls and weekend visits, honest conversations about past mistakes and future hopes. They'd learned to navigate the practical challenges of dating across different worlds, while building trust damaged by months of deception. Lily had grown 2 inches and gained confidence in her mechanical skills, proudly showing Emma the brake pad replacement she'd mastered under Jake's patient guidance. "Look what I learned while you were gone," she announced, displaying hands blackened with honest grease. Emma admired the work with genuine appreciation, then rolled up her sleeves to help. That evening, as they cleaned up from dinner, Jake noticed Emma wearing 2 bracelets on her wrist. One was expensive leather he recognized from their early meetings, a reminder of her corporate life and the husband she'd lost. The other was simple braided leather she'd learned to make during her visits, a symbol of the simpler life she'd chosen to embrace alongside her professional responsibilities. Jake wore his own matching pair now, Sarah's wedding gift, which honored his first love and the foundation of his capacity for devotion, and Emma's newer creation, which represented his willingness to love again without forgetting what came before. The bracelets didn't compete or cancel each other out. They coexisted as reminders that hearts could expand to hold multiple truths simultaneously. As they sat in the living room where Sarah's photographs still decorated the mantel and Emma's books now filled the shelves, Jake reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. He'd started the year as a widowed father, focused solely on survival and stability. He was ending it as a man who'd learned that healing didn't require forgetting, and that new love didn't diminish old love. Emma had found her own balance between corporate success and personal fulfillment. Sterling Dynamics was thriving under her restructured leadership model, but she no longer defined herself solely by professional achievements. She'd learned to delegate authority without abandoning responsibility, to pursue happiness without ignoring duty. The woman Jake had fallen for in those first deceptive months had been real after all, just incomplete. Emma Sterling, the CEO, and Emma, the small-town resident, weren't separate identities, but different facets of the same complex person. Jake had learned to love both versions and the integration they represented. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jake and Emma stood in his garage, looking at the space where their relationship had begun with deception and nearly ended with betrayal. Tools hung in their proper places, workbenches stood ready for tomorrow's projects, and motor oil stains marked the concrete floor like a map of honest labor. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked quietly. "The lies, the media attention, the complications I brought into your life?" Jake considered the question seriously. The past year had been difficult in ways he'd never imagined, but it had also brought gifts he'd never expected. "I regret the deception," Jake said finally. "I regret that we lost time rebuilding trust that should never have been broken. But Emma, I don't regret falling for you, and I don't regret fighting for what we built together. Lily has someone who loves her like a mother. I have someone who challenges me to grow while accepting who I am. That's worth whatever complications came with it." Emma nodded, understanding flowing between them without need for elaborate explanation. They'd both learned that authentic love required accepting people's complete selves, including the parts that didn't fit convenient categories or simple narratives. As they turned off the garage lights and walked toward the house, Jake realized he'd finally answered the question that had haunted him since Sarah's death. It was possible to honor the past while embracing the future. It was possible to love completely more than once. It was possible to heal without forgetting, to grow without abandoning what had shaped you. The man who'd carried an injured stranger to his garage nearly a year ago had thought he was simply helping someone in need. He'd discovered instead that sometimes the people we rescue end up rescuing us in return, and that the most profound transformations begin with the smallest acts of kindness. Jake Matthews had learned to love again, not because he'd forgotten Sarah, but because she'd taught him that love was meant to be shared, not hoarded. Emma Sterling had learned to live authentically, not by abandoning her responsibilities, but by integrating them with her deepest values and desires. Together, they'd built something neither could have created alone, a relationship that honored both their histories and their hopes, a love that was complicated but genuine, a future that promised challenges but also boundless possibilities. In the quiet house where Sarah's memory lived peacefully alongside Emma's presence, where Lily's laughter echoed through rooms that had once known only grief, Jake finally understood what his late wife had meant about not wasting love on sorrow. Love was meant to multiply, not diminish. Hearts were meant to expand, not close. And sometimes, the greatest act of honoring the past was learning to embrace an unexpected future. The struggling single father who'd carried a woman with a twisted ankle had no idea he was rescuing someone who would teach him that healing and loving could happen simultaneously. The billionaire CEO who'd been running from grief and responsibility had no idea she was about to discover that authentic life required integration, not escape. Neither of them had planned to fall in love. But sometimes the most important journeys begin with simple acts of compassion, and the most profound discoveries emerge from the courage to be vulnerable with strangers who become family. In Millbrook, Ohio, where small-town rhythms created space for big-city dreams, where honest work could coexist with corporate success, where past love could make room for future happiness, Jake Matthews and Emma Sterling had learned that the heart's capacity for healing was matched only by its capacity for hope. And in the garage where their story began, tools waited patiently for hands that had learned to build not just engines, but lives worth living together.